Greetings, this is Steve Welliver, and we're going to begin our Deprogramming series with Lesson 1, exploring the Bolshevik origins of the lie of white privilege. To answer the question of what is white privilege, we're going to go back to the last years of the Tsarist Russian Empire and look at a quote by Lenin in 1914. It said, "We proletarians declare in advance that we are opposed to Great Russian privilege, and this is what guides our entire propaganda and agitation." So there it is. An easy answer for what is white privilege is, just to quote Lenin, it is what guides our entire propaganda and agitation. We know that, of course, that's what we've lived through the past several years. Let's now turn to the Bolshevik origins for the related lie of white supremacy or white supremacy culture. In the spring of 1923, which is just months after the official founding of the Soviet Union, Stalin's nationalities thesis was delivered to the 12th Party Congress, and it declared that due to the, quote, former privileged position of the Great Russians, he goes on to say, the first immediate task of our party is vigorously to combat the survivals of Great Russian Chauvinism. It is this famous quote from Stalin that links the lie of a model for white privilege to the lie of white supremacy or white supremacy culture, and makes fighting it the first immediate task of our party. Again, over the last several years, you have lived through this. What seems like an attack on the ethno-racial majority could also be leveled at minorities. If minorities were expressing counter-revolutionary positions, they could be accused of Russo-Tiapsvo or mindless Russian chauvinism, just like nowadays American minorities can be accused of having whiteness for speaking against the socialist ideology. After World War II, Harvard interviewed Soviet refugees in a project known as the Harvard Refugee Interview Project. I'm going to read some quotes from former Soviet citizens here about what life was like during that time period when Russian privilege and Great Russian chauvinism were being attacked. This is from a male teacher, an army engineer. He says, "Before the war, the youth learned that there was nothing good in the history of Russia." So the kids were being constantly demoralized about the history of their own country. A different male Russian engineer, age 32, had the following to say, quote, "It was harder in the school for Great Russian students. Some Tatar could get bad marks and be threatened with expulsion, and all he would have to do would be set up a howl about Great Russian chauvinism, and he could bluff the administration into keeping him on. Russians could never use any excuse like that." Another quote, "The Russians, however, had more trouble than any of the others. This is on account of a law on Great Russian chauvinism, violation of which could be punished with up to 10 years of prison. A violation might take the form of a disparaging remark by a Russian about another nationality, or a member of that nationality, implying inferiority of that particular race. Incidentally, other nationality groups could make remarks about races without fear of punishment. The law applied only to Russians." Those quotes likely have an air of familiarity to them because the same exact program has been replicated here in America. Now, looking at America in recent years, Washington State Schools Superintendent Chris Rickdill in 2020 said, "As a white man of privilege, I have a responsibility to be an ally and to fight in the spaces in which I am empowered." Stalin had said, "It is the duty of the Russian communist himself to combat Russian chauvinism." Also in 2020, the Washington State Board of Education hired a contractor at a rate of $400 an hour, Tracy Castro Gill of Washington Ethnic Studies Now, for a program called Pulling the Weeds, Rooting Out Whiteness in the Classroom. To summarize this first step in deprogramming, we are recognizing that the Bolshevik lie of Russian privilege and Great Russian chauvinism from 100 years ago is the model that was unleashed on a naive population in the United States in recent years. The lie of white privilege became, in Lenin's words, what guides our entire propaganda and agitation, and the lie of white supremacy culture became what Stalin called the first immediate task of our party, was to combat that. Now, why do I call these things lies? Well, Terry Martin, a Russian history professor at Harvard, author of 2001's The Affirmative Action Empire, he wrote that out of the Harvard Refugee Interview Project's respondents, quote, not a single respondent asserted that the Russians were dominant and oppressed other nationalities. That concludes this episode, and I hope this is helpful in deprogramming. In upcoming lesson 2, we will examine the Bolshevik creation of BIPOCs.